First item on the agenda is apologies, and I have apologies from Councillors Matthew Jones and Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams. Any further apologies?
Well, Mary's not here at the moment, but she'll be here in a couple of minutes. So,
okay. Right, that being the case, we move on to the next item, which is item 2, disclosure of personal and prejudicial interest. Members first. No. Any members?
No.
No. Okay, then officers? No. Right, okay. Item 3 is the item on prohibition of whip votes and declarations of party whips. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meetings, agreed minutes of the 8th of October. Any issues? No? Okay. Then item 5 is public questions, and we have none for this meeting. Item 6 is the review of revenue reserves. And over to Leader. Do you wish to say anything before?
Thank you, Chair. I'll let Mr. Smith go first, if that's okay.
No problem. Mr. Smith, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Chair. You will recall that this recently went to Council. It is an annual review that I'm required to do, discharge my duties. A reminder of what it is and what it isn't. It is a review of the reserves at the end of March 2024 as to their adequacy and reasonableness given the outlook for the authority. It does not go on to propose using those reserves. Those are matters for decisions by Cabinet in year, Council when it comes to budget setting. As set out in the report, it makes clear it is dependent on the statement of accounts being approved and audited by the auditors. I remain in active consultation with themselves. There is regrettably going to repeat a repeat of last year, where the statement of accounts is likely to be signed off quite late towards the end of the year, in a flurry at exactly the same time as decisions are being taken by Council on budget setting. Having said that, in terms of preamble, the important stuff to note is you will know that at outturn, I recommended, and it was approved, that £2 million was added to general reserves, £6 million was added to HRA reserves. There were a drawdown on a number of earmarked reserves which were planned, but equally a very substantial add to the capital equalisation reserve as a result of the £17 million underspend on capital financing. And that is why we ended up where we are with the reserves set out in the report. So as well as the significant increase in general fund reserves and HRA reserves, which bolsters the authority's overall break in case of emergency rainy day pots, the earmarked reserves remained adequate and sufficient for the risks and size and scale of the authority, and indeed when compared to other authorities in Wales. Whilst our general reserves were at the lower end, they're now at mid-table. Our HRA reserves are now at the top end of the table. Our earmarked reserves, unequivocally for the avoidance of doubt, are towards the upper end of all authorities in Wales, and does give me sufficient confidence as your Section 151 officer that your reserves are robust and suitable for the scale of activity that you are likely to be undertaking as an authority for the next couple of years. The rest of the report sets out in normal fashion the weird and wonderful makey-uppy reserves, the statutory unusable reserves, and reminds you of the difference between the uses of capital and revenue, and reminds you about the ultra ring-fenced nature of the HRA. So I think that's probably all you need from technical advice from myself. Setting it in context, the position is significantly strengthened on both the general fund and HRA general reserves, and remain well bolstered, strong compared to other authorities across Wales. And of course that is a very useful weapon to have in the armoury as we still continue to see what the National Reset budget proposals do and what remain undoubted pressures in local government across the piece, both in Wales and the wider UK. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Leader?
Yeah, not a lot to add to what Mr. Smith said, but just to emphasise the point, our general reserves are at the lowest advisable level, even though the Audit Wales asked us to increase the level of general reserves, which we have now done. As Mr. Smith has said, our earmark reserves are substantial, and that is a good position for us to be in. But some of those earmark reserves were set up for specific purposes to help us to deal with things like the costs of the capital programme, and you will see draws from those reserves as planned in the coming years. So nothing more to add to that, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Are there any questions? Councillor Black?
Yeah, just information really on paragraph 3.1. Could Ben actually talk us through the earmarked reserves? Some of them are fairly obvious, but others don't appear to be, you know, just a reminder really, if that's possible.
Mr. Smith? Has he disappeared? Oh,
I
there he
am
is.
there. I'm hastily reading. Councillor Black, did you say 3.1?
3.11.
Oh, 3.11. I've misread.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Just talk us through what each category of those reserves. I mean, obviously the schools delegated reserves are and the equalisation reserves are obvious. Just that, and the insurance is obvious, but there are a couple of others just interested in what the intention of each reserve is for.
Yes, so certainly. So the third party ones again should be relatively obvious that they're held on behalf of others, not ours. So they're ultra ring fenced. The transformation and efficiency was earmarked to particularly drive some efficiencies and transformation in ICT and HR, and proposals have been set out in the budget which was approved to draw those down quite significantly. As you say, the schools delegated reserves is quite obvious. The bulk of the equalisation reserve, there's a couple of little bits and pieces in there, but the very bulk of that is where that capital equalisation reserve sits. As you would have anticipated, you will be aware, members, that the commuted sums or sums paid over by third parties and held for discharging liabilities for a number of years going forward. The repairs and renewals and our sinking funds are to maintain some of our buildings across a range of them. Some of them are general provisions against a range of assets. Some are very specific to very individual specific sites. We have entered into a number of joint ventures, predominantly with Welsh Government, where again there is a sort of quasi ring-fenced element in terms of what's ours versus theirs in terms of joint ventures. A very significant sum is held in individual service earmarked reserves. You will have heard, for example, from the Director of Social Services at last council when he did his annual report, that part of the insulation for social services in recent years has been their own very substantial earmarked reserves, but he pretty much said they've been spent, and therefore that is manifesting itself. You saw it in first quarter overspends, and you were likely to see that in due course in second quarter overspends. Got rid of the restructuring cost reserve over a year ago, so I should have deleted out both of those years when the report went to council. Oversight on my part. Contingency, we at outturn had underspent by 12 million. I added 12 million pounds to contingency. Technically, I advised Cabinet to approve 12 million to contingency. I've got no powers myself. And that was rolled forward to be added to the in-year contingency sum. We continue at the moment to budget each year for a contingency, which is effectively a revenue contribution to the earmarked reserve called contingency. Pre-23-24 outturn, that have been drawn down to 0. So topping that up to 12 million and adding it to the in-year contingency was, as you will recall, the very important tool that has been used to protect the authority at first quarter for the significant overspends in homelessness and social services, which every council is facing, but it provided us with a very useful one-off mechanism to deploy. The IT Development Fund is, as a clue suggests, for developments related to IT, included some of the bits on Oracle. And the Recovery Fund is the residual part of the Economic Recovery Fund, which was set up, which originally had 20 million, extended to 45 million, had money stolen out of it to provide for 15 million pounds centrally, to provide for the energy central support, which we then used to make sure that we protected schools and ourselves as corporate landlord and a number of key strategic third parties. The last 2 years have seen significant draws from the Economic Recovery Fund, but it is the residual sums for the final bits being worked through to ensure that all the member aspirations and decisions made on deploying the Recovery Fund are able to be funded through to their fruition, and that will eventually come to 0. I did provide for a little bit of contingency in there. You'll be well aware that some schemes overspend when there's a timing delay on it, but you can anticipate that the recovery fund will itself ultimately be drawn down to 0. So hopefully that gives you a relatively additional useful canter through as to what they're for and how they're for, and sets it in the context of some of the things that I'm anticipating have already been spent, particularly in social services, or are likely to be spent as a result of the triaging we've done at first quarter. Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So effectively, we've got 2 reserves relating to ICT, the Transformation Fund and also the IT Development Fund. Is that correct?
Yes. The IT Development Fund was a service reserve created for itself. The restructure reserve was taken and repurposed to be the transformation reserve, which was then fully allocated in first waves to both HR and IT transformation. I think it's just indicative of the sheer amount of spend that's needed in ICT transformation to be able to potentially transform and support other services and realise potential transformation and efficiency gains further down the line.
And all that money is effectively committed now, is it, on both those reserves? Or
if effectively they are, there is a work programme to be worked through, and you can work on the basis that those are committed to be spent over the coming couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Say they're not committed in 1 year, or they're committed over a number of years.
Over several years, correct, Chair.
Okay, oh, sorry, Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just clarification, really. Sorry, I'm trying to read something small here. The general fund reserve, I can actually see, 12 million pound there. You actually say it's adequate, but you also say that it's below the Welsh average. Why is it below the Welsh average? And you actually say that I think Cabinet approved another 2 million to actually go on to the 12 million, or for this coming year. And
So
why you have you added another 2 million if it's adequate?
So to clarify, if I may, Chair, I'll start with the last question first. At the end of 22-23, there was 10 million in. Cabinet agreed at outturn to add 2 million to take general fund reserves to the 12 million that is referenced at the balance sheet date. That is still subject to audit certification. I'm sure that will not change, but it is the 10 being topped up to 12 by that 2 million, which has already been factored into the report. I continue to advise it's at the minimum level because this is the second, third largest, depending on population versus spend, authority in Wales. That general fund reserve is still only approximately 2% of our spend. It would last us about a week if we ever got to having to break into that general fund reserve. It's been very rare for us to be able to top it up in recent years. There has on my tenure been 1 year where we had to draw money from it. If you go back 6 or 7 years, it was at 13 million. It did drop to 10. It stayed at 10 for a number of years. Given each year our budget has significantly increased, there is also a drift effect, isn't there? If you're not in a position to ever top it up, as your overall revenue budget grows, it becomes proportionately a smaller and smaller share of the overall spend. As a result of that 2 million, my look across Wales means we are likely to move to nearer to mid-table rather than bottom of the table. As it were, and it is unashamedly and deliberately part of the stated strategy, which is we have one of the highest levels of earmarked reserves, one of the lowest levels of general fund reserves. Other authorities do it the other way around. They hold smaller amounts in earmarked reserves and would hold a proportionately larger amount in general reserves. It becomes ultimately a decision based on the individual authority's size, risk appetite, level of activities. The authority has done heavy capital lifting for a number of years, as you are well aware, and has made a number of decisions which have proven to be mostly beneficial in terms of the borrowing decision and timing, but it did commit to substantial sums and we knew there would be pressures in some years, and that was, for example, the reason the capital equalisation reserve was set up. It seemed to me perfectly logical, recognising that we were uniquely different to others, both in terms of relative scale of capital spend and uniquely different in terms of our treasury management strategy, to keep general fund reserves lower and very much specifically identify a very significant capital equalisation reserve held for the purposes entirely of trying to smooth out some of those risks over the medium-term time frame on capital. So it's a judgment view. I'm still going to say they're at the bare minimum because there are a couple of percentage points of overall spend as the final break jam jar in case of absolute emergency, but the anticipation is that we will draw from a number of earmarked reserves first, and you will be aware that for several years the budget has been set with a targeted and deliberate draw from earmarked reserves, predominantly for capital equalisation reserve, but equally over recent years for the purpose of establishing and then spending down the economic recovery fund. I personally think it gives a better steer as to what the reserves are likely to be held for rather than hold it all in one big bucket called general fund reserve. But it's personal choice. My judgment view as a whole is taken together, undoubtedly the bolstering of general fund and HRA and being able to broadly maintain the level of earmarked reserves, notwithstanding there will be further deployments from them, leads me to conclude that we are in a relatively strong position. And when the next lot of Audit Wales data tool analysis comes out, that will be confirmed. They do a number of high-level measures of your overall liquidity, your overall levels of reserves, your overall levels of reserves compared to the relative size of the authority. And on most of those metrics, we look perfectly robust and in good health.
Okay, Jeff.
Yes, thanks for that. If I can just ask something else as well, just for clarification. We had the budget last week, and I'm not quite sure it was mentioned that local authorities perhaps would have a better settlement. I know it's actually up to Cardiff at the end of the day. I know they've given us, I think you've actually said in 3.1, a forward settlement of a 2% increase in government funding for 3 years. I can see it also mentions in that paragraph that we've got quite large savings requirements. Is there any mention that we may get a better settlement from Welsh Government in the coming years because of the budget?
I have
So-
to say, Jeff, I don't know if Ben can answer that question at the moment.
I will answer in a non-answer way, Chair,
Yeah,
by
there we are.
saying
Let
you're
him
quite
answer
right.
anyway.
It is too early to tell. The Cardiff lens through Cardiff Bay has yet to be applied. But if I look at what the Institute for Fiscal Studies has concluded in terms of an England context and subject to Barnett consequences and everything washing through, on paper, local government was a significant recipient of additional real terms money in England. No guarantee it washes through to Wales. But the main reason for being uncertain is the cost pressures that potentially come with it. I won't say much because we don't know much yet, but clearly those increases to national living wage, which don't directly affect us because local government pays above that figure, but for contractors, the proposed increase in employers' national insurance contributions will have an impact. I have made initial estimates of what that impact is going to be, and it is my judgment view that quite a significant amount of the likely uplift that comes to local government will be soaked up by some of those increases in other costs. But it is certainly the case based on IFS assumptions and Office for Budget Responsibility assumptions that there is potentially more money in the system, potentially for local government, but it depends how much is taken for the NHS, in particular in Wales, and what the split is between revenue and capital. It was a very, very big budget in terms of tax raising and spending plans. I think there's still quite a lot of detail to be worked through, and that's why I'm on for giving an update to Council at its next available slot in December. It will be just before we get the Welsh Government settlement. But there is nothing that leads me to conclude we're worse off as a result of the proposals. I think an element of it is going to be how much is it worth in real terms when you strip out some of those impacts that are built in. And I think you can all see quite a lot of commentary in the national media and from various think tanks and opinion formers on it. But really, it's too early to entirely tell because some of the devil will be in the detail. I just use as an example the media reports on, the public sector will be compensated for employer NI increases or it will be exempt. Those are the sorts of phrases being used. I don't read it that way at all. I read it as tax will have gone up, policy decision by UK government. There will be costs for all employers. We are an employer. I am making the explicit assumption that we will be significantly compensated in revenue support grant, and other public bodies will be significantly compensated in their grant from Welsh Government in the same way the UK Government is making arrangements for there to be compensation in England and an appropriate Barnett consequential through to Wales. So I think that's the bit that's going to be the interesting part as to when all the smoke and mirrors and dust dies down, what is it really worth in terms of additional true spending power as opposed to what's washed through. Much of the rest of the budget does not directly impact us, but it will indirectly impact us on the views expressed around likelihood of inflation potentially being a little bit higher, but still expected to trend back down towards levels, and that interest rates are expected to reduce. We have a deferral of our borrowing strategy, well advanced, well explained in council, that relies on interest rates coming down. So there are some indirect benefits that I do anticipate. Long answer to say, I know nothing else any more than anyone else, but just to try to give you a bit of a non-answer in that answer, Councillor Jones.
No, thank
Jeff,
you, Ben.
don't ask that question again.
Very a good insight. Many thanks.
Okay, Leader.
Yeah, Chair, just really to add to what Ben said, but just to point out that the UK government have already said this year is a 1 year settlement. We will not have that 3 year projection on what the settlement will look like until after the comprehensive spending review. So that unfortunately leaves us in a position of, we will know, as Ben said, in December what the Welsh Government decisions are, as you would expect us to do in the WLGA. We are lobbying Welsh Government hard to make sure that everything we think is a consequential actually comes to local government. You would expect us to do that. but we will know in December. But really, that position we want to get to, which the government have said they will provide, which is a 3-year set of assumptions on funding, we won't have that until the following year. And at that point, then Ben and all of us can look at what the future of the MTFP looks like and what the future funding arrangements look like and potential pressures, or hopefully additional cash coming in. So it's just to say we don't have the 3-year forward look at the moment that we would all like.
Thank you, Rita. I'll get back to the agenda item. In the list of earmarked reserves, the service earmarked reserve, that £34 million, Ben, does that include an earmarked reserve for social services, or is that been taken out? What is that? Because reserve, you have quite a lot of cash to be used. You know, these are monies that could be used in the revenue account anyway, like equalisations at reserve. These are not, these are owned by the council themselves. So the thing is, you've got to ask yourself, when we have cuts in services or we have cuts in jobs, and yet we have these reserves, the service earmark reserve, the contingency plus equalisation reserve are cash which are taken out of revenue. So I would ask, can you explain what the service earmark reserves are and confirm that they are all cash?
So it is a very, very long list of hundreds and thousands of entries, some of which are frankly for tuppence halfpenny, some of which are very significant. I do have the world's most enormous spreadsheet which reconciles back to the figure. There are still some balances on adults and children's social services earmarked reserves at the 31st of March 24, but as Mr Howes has made clear in his update to council, and I've made clear in first quarter, you can anticipate them to have been spent entirely. You will see a number of the other reserves drawn down in year, and although I can't prejudge what Cabinet will decide post-settlement and recommend to Council, I am pretty darn certain that there will be a further planned draw from earmarked reserves to ameliorate as many of the pressures as is possible. And as the leader indicated, and it was an oversight on my part, because we're getting a 1-year deal and the comprehensive spending review is not resolved until the end of March, when you are legally obliged to set a budget by the 11th of March, it will be right and appropriate to buy as much time as possible in setting a 1-year budget for the council. Yes, having regard to the medium term, yes, having regard to the longer term, as Audit Wales have asked us to do, but it is perfectly legitimate, both as myself as your officer, advisor and members, to make a policy decision ultimately to buy as much time as possible and see what turns up post that comprehensive spending review. So I am absolutely certain there will continue to be significant planned draws from earmarked reserves. It will include the extinguishment of some several £million still in the social services reserves, but assumed fully spent already at first quarter. I could go into the list. The list is very, very long. But you know, I have a, you know, it's a raft of things. I can give you as much of a flavour or detail as you desire, but it is across literally hundreds and hundreds of lines to the pound added up, and they come to the numbers quoted in the statement of accounts. I don't think it's particularly useful for me to go through them in any great detail per se, but I will be guided by the panel as to how much detail it wishes to see on each and every one of those service reserves.
I think it's just a general figure at some stage in the future, you know, what social service reserves are, what education, highways, etc. I think just a headline figure would be helpful.
That
And
might be, yeah, sorry, yeah.
And the equalisation reserve, we know that's all revenue anyway. That's been taken out, which should have gone to pay off the interest or the capital funding. So I think that's it. You know, that's it really, just to confirm that it is all revenue.
It's all revenue. They're cash backed. And yes, I will reflect on what's the best way to sort of give you a halfway house. And I think you're right, panel chair. That's a way of having a halfway house, which gives a bit more granularity on what is a single entry for 123 million quid, and perhaps does at least give a flavour of which directorate, which service area it's in, maybe a way of giving a further level of granularity to the analysis and aid understanding without giving you all of them to the nearest penny in the underlying statement of accounts, because as you rightly understand, there are a very large number of entries. Like that may be a very pragmatic way for me to pause and reflect on providing further granularity in future years for both this panel but also for council, maybe some sort of subset of that particularly large entry, just giving a flavour as to what they are, and maybe a bit of additional commentary as to the likelihood of which ones are likely to disappear off the face of the earth. For example, the social service ones. I know if I'd redone the exercise now, you would have had an entry for there was still £4 million in social services reserves after the draw from the previous year. And with sure as eggs is eggs, that's going to be naught at the end of this year. So that's something for me to reflect on. So if you're happy with that panel, I'll take that one away and think about that for giving a better steer in future years, both to council and yourselves when it comes to scrutinising it. Thank you for that contribution, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Black?
Yeah, does that reserve, not going into any detail for obvious reasons, does that reserve contain money for equal pay claims, or is that a separate budget line?
So equal pay, on my advice, has been set aside as a provision, and that is entirely separate from the list of earmarked reserves. In technical accounting terms, that is held as a provision, not an earmarked reserve. It has slightly different nuances and connotations and slightly different thresholds, but for the avoidance of doubt, that this is not in this list. It is held entirely separately, Councillor Black.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other further questions on this item? If not, thank you all very much indeed. And now come on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6, Regeneration Project Summary Report. Now, Councillor Robert Francis Davis, would like to say something at the beginning and then hand over to Mr. Phil. Robert?
Yeah, I will hand
Phil
over
Holmes.
shortly to Mr. Holmes. Obviously, you have the report before you for you to look at. You will see on page, I think it's 36, the strategic sites and projects overview. You've got 4 columns there. It shows on the first column all the projects. Column 2 shows you a brief description of each project. Column 3 will show you the key updates, and then on column 4, all the milestones. And we have the team here, happy to take questions on anything that's before you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Mr. Holmes?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the report, so it's a summary report. It's an update, I guess. But I suppose the key thing that you might want to take away from it is, in terms of the programme that we're dealing with, the breadth and the scale and the complexity of it is pretty remarkable. I'd say it's probably one of the most ambitious programmes in the country, and the progress that we're making is equally as remarkable in terms of the achievements to date. If it's okay with you, Chair, perhaps I can just introduce each one, and then if there's a question on it, or we'll deal with it in that way rather than go through the whole thing in one go. So arguably the flagship project for the programme is Copper Bay Phase 1. So you'll all be familiar with the project, 3,500 capacity arena, the hotel, the coastal park above the car parking, the new bridge, the residential, and the car parking to the north of the site. So it's been very successful. The arena's obviously been completed and opened, and has been very welcomed by the people of Swansea and wider. Very successful to date. The big problem, of course, was the administration of Buckingham in terms of them as a contractor entity. So sadly, that happened. There was nothing we could do about that, and that meant the project was incomplete. And the big part that needs completing, of course, is the car park on the north of the site. So pleased to say, in terms of the update, we now have a local company, Andrew Scott, on board, working very well on that north car park, and some of the snagging for the rest of the project as well. So that's going very well, and hopefully that'll be completed Q2 next year. I'll also update as well in terms of the other missing piece of the jigsaw in terms of this project, the hotel. So negotiations going very well with our preferred hotel developer. So if you remember, we went back out to the market. We now have a new company on board, and hopefully those heads of terms will be completed by the end of the year, and then that will set the scene then for the next phase of development. Any questions on that, Chair?
Okay, are there any questions on phase 1 of Clobber Bay? Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. I mean, can I just, I mean, you say the car park is the main issue. There's also, I think, the lift isn't working as well. There's a whole range of issues from that. And I know that, I don't want to go into detail because the report was in camera, but the Cabinet has put forward a solution to try and get this sorted as soon as possible. So when do you envisage the whole thing being completed? And can we go into camera afterwards and go into the detail on the finances, if that's possible? Yeah.
By Q2 2025, the car park will be completed and all the snagging.
Everything.
Yeah, I think the thing that probably remains then is the demolition of the old car park, which has to follow.
Yeah.
And of course, other phases of development in terms of Copper Bay will then happen over time. But in terms of this project, we're looking at Q2 next year.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be useful to look at the finances in a bit more detail in camera. Yeah.
I think Q2 for the car park is hopefully, other than definite. I think it's hopefully, not definite.
So the end of June then. He says.
Let's just wait and see what comes back from Andrew Scott on the conditions and what have you. Okay, can we then go on to Block B, Public Sector Hub? Yeah, so Block B sort of follows, if you like, in terms of a next phase in terms of Copper Bay, what we call Swansea Central North as a wider sort of area. So this is a flexible office building. It will accommodate the council and other public sector bodies as well. And in terms of progress here, we have the Reserve Matters application actually going to Planning Committee this afternoon. The design process is progressing very well. Stage 3 in terms of the REBA stages has been completed. And we're hoping again for works to commence on site next year, probably Q3. So that's the time frame we're looking at. Any questions? I must admit, I have a number of questions on this one because the reality of this is it's going to accommodate some council offices, and we're building this, and it's supposed to be a governed hub and what have you. Are we any confidence that there will be new jobs in there, not jobs that are coming from existing buildings? Because we know that Department of Transport got some places in Swansea. We also know the DVLA need office space as well. So are we going to replace, are we going to have jobs, new jobs, or are we going to have jobs that are coming from elsewhere? I suspect it's going to be a combination of that, but am I right in that? Or well, obviously some the council jobs are existing jobs, but I anticipate additionality in the sense that there'll be new jobs to Swansea. Maybe they'll be relocating from other parts of the country, but in terms of Swansea's economy, they will offer additionality in terms of jobs created. We don't know yet. I don't know the exact mix at this stage. Okay, Councillor Leader.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think to add to what Mr. Holmes has said, I think the intention is to move those departments that are currently housed in the Civic Centre across. And again, my understanding is the UK government departments have identified that potentially they need more space than they currently have. So that will take a bigger space in that government block. We continue to have discussions with Welsh Government about taking space there and potentially moving out of their offices that they have in the locality. So that is also potentially in the mix. And of course, both UK Government and Welsh Government have strategies to move functions out of the capitals and out to other regions of the country. So again, we'd be hoping to take some value out of that. What I would say, though, is it's not just what you move into that building, but it's about the fact that you're moving stuff from outside of the city centre into the core city centre to help with footfall, footflow, and economic activity in the city centre. That is important if we are to attract further retailers and operators in the city centre, because when they evaluate Swansea, they'll look at the numbers of people working nearby as part of their evaluation. Subject to that happening, then the intention would be that Urban Splash then take over the control of the civic centre, and that further fit out takes place there and conversion into a public-facing building with other operations, which again, more details to come on that as we work through that with Urban Splash. But again, it's not just looking at this site in operation. This site both adds to the city centre, but is also an enabler and unlocks our ability to repurpose the civic centre and to bring in other new jobs and new operations into the civic centre in due course.
I accept that, Leader. It's just the fact that, you know, it is advertised on the Evening Post, which is always right, as we know, about the number of jobs that were there. And I think we need to understand that some of those jobs are actually going to be transferred from one place to another, but there could possibly be new jobs being created by other people entering that building. I think that's the clarification we wanted. And I think about moving the jobs around, you know, the current civic centre do have people from there do go in the city centre, but I do accept what you're saying about moving the jobs into the core as opposed to having them outside that. So I think that's I think the explanation of what we wanted. Thank you. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, with regards to this, I know we're actually saying Copper Bay and we're also saying City Deal as well. This hub is not a City Deal project. It may be part of the, well, shall we say Copper Bay and so on. But what sort of financial liability is there actually on the council? Are we actually paying for this? And an ongoing maintenance? I know you mentioned Urban Splash as well, but you know, what sort of financial liability is actually going to be down to the council on this project?
Don't think Urban Splash are building this, but over to the Leader.
Yeah, so Councillor Jones, I think you've got to look at this. I've used the word liability. I've used the word asset on this one, because what you're creating is a new office block in the city centre. You're handing potentially then the operation of the civic centre, which is currently a liability, over to Urban Splash for them to regenerate. So you're basically moving some of the stuff that you would otherwise have to deal with over to a partner to regenerate. And then, of course, you're moving well-paying, robust tenants, government tenants, into that building. So again, as you would do with all of the sorts of developments like this, you would look at the return on that investment that the tenants would pay over a period of time to help you fund the development of that block. And that's an established way of doing this. So again, that's why it's important that we lock in our government partners as well as ourselves into this building, and that enables us then to finance it over a period of time.
Yeah, perhaps I use the word liability, where I'm actually, what sort of contribution are the council making to this project?
So that's a decision for Cabinet, Councillor Jones, but it's likely that we will be the funder of this development on the basis that then it develops a income stream for the council and for the taxpayer.
Okay.
And what sort of return are we actually expecting? You know, I don't know what the outlay is.
Councillor Jones, we're in public session here, and those are commercial discussions, and it wouldn't be inappropriate for us to divulge to the open market what sorts of returns the council would expect for the taxpayer in open session. I'm sure you'll appreciate that.
Yes, I do.
Okay, can we move on to the next item, which is Castle Square?
Okay, so don't really need to say too much about this well-publicized project in terms of the enhancement and the impact it'll have in terms of that key part of the city centre. So in terms of where we are at the moment, we continue to work with the contractor, refining the design and the costs, and we'll be bringing a report to Cabinet early next year, hopefully for approval. and hopefully for a start on site in Q2 next year.
Any comments on Castle Square?
No, other than we've given a commitment. I think at the moment we are looking at the bids that are coming in, and as Mr. Holmes has said, the intention is to be on site early in the new year.
I think this is another one we would like to ask in private session about. Okay. On Skyline, because of the planning application and because of the issues around that, what would suggest, Mr. Holmes, is that we do not have too much of a discussion on that because of the ongoing planning consent. And I know there are councillors on this committee or on this panel who actually sit on planning, and it could be seen as being predetermination if they ask questions on it.
It's fine. Shall I skip over that one?
I think
there's an update.
I think it's wise
There we are.
on this particular occasion.
Okay.
And then it comes on to 71, 72, the Kingsway.
Yeah, and I know the panel had a detailed session on this about a month ago, I think it was. So again, I won't labour this one other than to say that the building now is very, very close to completion. It's taken a little bit longer because what we decided to do was to do the landlord fit out works as part of the existing contract with the current contractor. It just made more sense. It was more efficient to do it that way. But the most important thing is that we are very close now to having that completed, and 75% of the office space is under offer. So getting that completed is a priority by the end of the year, and another priority for me personally, but I know for the team and for colleagues, is to get started on what we agreed to do in terms of remembering Hugh Mowbray in terms of Mowbray Yard. So that would start next year as well.
I totally agree with the last statement you made on that. But any questions on this? I do have a number of questions on this, but I think it's more appropriate that the only question I would have publicly is to ask that once we know the tenants and they've signed up, I think it's important that the public be told who they are, because it is important. There are lots and lots of comments about the building and the potential costs of it, because the full cost is yet to be discussed in public. So I think it's very important that we do know that once we have those particular details. Thank you. The placemaking plan, I didn't even know there was one of these. Carry on.
Yeah, so the placemaking plan, if I had to summarize it in terms of what it is, it's the next vision for the city centre. So in years gone by, we've had a city centre framework, and then we had something called the SCARF document, you may recall. This is the next generation of that, and this will set out the next programme of regeneration and investment that we'd like to see delivered in the city centre. So it gives us a game plan for the future. It goes well beyond this programme, and lots of consultation undertaken. We're now at the stage where we're teasing out some of the interventions and how we could deliver them, and that will inform the plan and the action plan. So we'll be taking updates forward to the Regen Programme Board from this month. And we'll bring this to a future meeting. It's probably a good item to have a dedicated session on, I suppose.
Any members, any questions?
So does this go to cabinet sort of planning or initiative?
It will go to cabinet,
Yeah,
because it'll be a new strategy for the city centre. I might even go to council. I don't know in terms of adopting it as a policy. We have to take advice on that, but certainly it would have to be give us some adopted status, because then it allows us then to talk to funders, and it gives it a more robust position in terms of our planning framework.
So at some stage it should come.
It inform the LDP too as well.
Yeah, so some stage it should come either to this committee or to this programme committee to look at some detail at it.
By all means.
It will come here under regeneration and service improvement. The point of this is, I think this is about the fourth one I've seen, and each one has had aspirations. We haven't even been able to get up to those aspirations, but it would be nice to see what the next schemes are likely to be anyway. Okay, can we move on to Palace Theatre, which is officially opened yesterday or whatever?
Yeah, well, there's a launch event as well Thursday, I think it is. So again, it's one of those projects that you probably might only do one or two of these in your career. Historic building, regenerating it, and then bringing it back to life with some high value added operators. So yeah, it's a great project for the city, and I'm sure others will want to learn from it in the future. But yeah, opening Thursday.
Yeah, we've been up there a couple of times to have a look at it as a scrutiny board, as before it was finished, after it's finished, and again, the financial contribution and what it's likely to cost, that has to be a discussion that's been held at some time in the future when the contracts are finished. Any questions? No? Okay, then we come on to Towie Riverside strategy.
Yeah, so I mean, this really is the next sort of phase of investment that we're seeing now through the Levelling Up program, building on the success of the investment that we made in the powerhouse and the private sector investment through Penderyn. So the laboratory building contracts exchanged and works to commence this month, and then also on the engine houses as well, live planning applications there. So again, it's just adding to the hopefully the revitalization of that whole riverside corridor, which is a key part of Swansea's heritage and history.
Okay, any questions or comments on this?
Engine house application, planning application, end of October. So assuming, has that actually been determined, or is that due imminently?
Was that it's due, is it? Right. So that's slightly out of date then. So it's
Yeah.
it's
Assuming
coming
it's
soon,
delegated,
coming
off
soon.
delegated decision. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else has any questions or comments? No? Okay, so we move on to the next item, which is City
Yeah.
Waterfront Civic
Yeah.
Centre. Well,
So
I think we've had
the
that
leader touched on
discussion.
that
haven't we?
earlier. Yeah. So I think he's covered that, and we're waiting for those proposals to come in.
The
now
next
in
one
November.
is St Thomas, which is a very interesting one considering what happened the last time.
Yeah, St Thomas is part of the strategic sites that we have, the arrangement that we have with Urban Splash. So they are working on that with their partners. We've seen the stage 1 proposals, very excited. And again, it's part of the revitalisation of the river corridor. So those proposals will be worked up now, and we'll be taking those through the system as of next year. To progress them in terms of detail and hopefully a planning application in due course.
Allowed to ask here, is this the St Thomas railway station site, or is this the other sites on St Thomas, further down?
This is the site on the right-hand side of the river as you look up the river.
It says the river, it is the station site.
Yes, I think that's what it was called.
Yeah, and by the compound going up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the one that. Okay, the next item is Debenhams.
Yeah, so
good luck with this one, Phil.
It's going well. It's a key investment for the council. Very good discussion so far with potential occupiers. Very close now to getting some ink on paper with them. We've got a professional team on board as well, working up proposals in terms of getting us to a point where we can award a contract to address the issues of the building. So that work will complete next year in terms of the design works, and we'd love to see a start on site in 2025, probably towards the end of the year, I guess, with an opening in October 2026.
Any questions? Councillor Black? Councillor Locke?
We've been led to believe, and it's nice to hear discussions ongoing with potential retail and leisure tenants, but now we're talking about October 26. So I'm just wondering how far advanced are those discussions, and if they are quite advanced, they're going to have to wait some time before they can actually occupy the building. So, this is quite this timetable is a surprise to me, because I understood that we were much more imminent in getting that building occupied than we appear to be.
I think that's the nature of the retail industry. There's a long lead-in time, so those discussions have to start early, so that retailers can plan for the investment. Of course, they'll have a fit out as well, but the building requires some work doing by the council in terms of things like mechanical and engineering systems. The landlord fit out. So there's a whole process there. So that's why it takes so long.
So we're looking for nearly 2 years before that site is occupied again.
Hopefully sooner, but
Yeah.
I mean that's hopefully worst case scenario.
Okay, I've got the leader, then Councillor Locke.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad Mr. Holmes said that, because it is the worst case scenario, and we're clearly driving for an earlier opening date than that. As you'll know, Chair, I came to this meeting previously to share my frustration at the fact that we are engaged with tenants, but we can't announce them until we've reached a specific point in the process. They won't allow us to share their names. Similarly, as we discussed on 7172 Kingsway, we are 80% let on that building, and I'm very, very keen to tell everybody who those tenants are, but we are unable to do that until we get agreement from those tenants. So again, just to be clear, we would hope to be able to announce those new tenants in the new year. There will be, depending on the mix of the tenants in Debenhams, there's likely to be 2 major retailers with a leisure operator. That will require significant restructuring of the building into those various units, and potentially a restructuring of the elements and accesses to the quadrant. That's why they're potentially on, depending on who we get, that the timescales could be a bit longer. But that will be done in terms of making sure that we get the best long-term solution for the quadrant and for the city centre. So it is a balance, but we are working, and I know the team are working hard to bring that timescale in as far as we can. So that would be the worst case scenario. We hope to be in a position where that's open a lot sooner.
Yes, is it possible you have clarification of what kind of business the leisure operator is? I mean, I know you can't say who they are, but is this gyms or is there something else?
No,
It's various, and it's a mixture of the leisure industry. So it's not just one type. It's a mixture, and that will be the upper 2 floors of the building. And so therefore you need access into it. But very exciting, but we can't name it yet. Again, confidentiality.
Okay. The other comment I've got, I don't know what the condition of the inside of the building is like, but the outside of the building on one part looks pretty awful.
Yeah, the work that we would do would encompass the whole building, so it would effectively look and feel like a new building. The actual structure itself is pretty sound, but of course it needs investment. It's a building of a certain age, so.
Anyone else? I know that when we built the bus station and the connection between the bus station and Debenhams was an issue. Can't remember all the details, but I know it was an issue. But I think that could possibly still be an issue when the new development takes place. Leader, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Chair, just to say, look, I mean, clearly the exterior of the building has been up a couple of decades. The aim would be, when we have the new tenants in place, to look at a reskinning and an upgrade to the exterior of the building to modernise it. But it'd be inappropriate to do that ahead of reconfiguring the building and doing all of the necessary work that we'd want to do on the interior. So Councillor Locke has made a valid point around how we do that. Again, things like the service yard, things like the access around the back where shop mobility is, etc. All of those could do with an upgrade as well. And again, those are parts of the thinking that's going on. And Chair, just a suggestion, really. I mean, I think in terms of these schemes, I mean, I think this report is a high-level public report. The sorts of questions that I'm sure members would want to get into are ones better dealt with through a detailed report, probably in private session.
I think that is something which that discussion will be had elsewhere.
Yeah, given it's a building of a certain age, are you anticipating issues with asbestos as we had in British Home Stores and Oceania?
No.
You surveyed us, have you, Rob?
That's why it's taking longer, Councillor Black, is because the
Okay.
due diligence has been done on this one.
Okay, just checking. Right, thank you.
Oh, so it wasn't done on the others then?
No, absolutely not. As you know, we do due diligence on all sites. But when you're inheriting a building, you always potentially have issues that you come across. Given the age of the quadrant and its construction and the work that's been done by officers, we are confident that that isn't an issue.
I won't say any more than that. Right, okay, can we move on to the next one whose name I can't pronounce, but
Estorva.
Estorva.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say on this one other than works are ongoing and aiming for practical completion end of next year.
Is that completion date as projected previously, or has there been any slippage?
I think there has been slippage. It's not one of our projects. It's been delivered by a different part of the council, but I think there has been slippage, and the reasons are the same as the reasons that we've had of slippage on all the projects in terms of prevailing economic conditions. None of the projects have been as easy as well. None of them have been easy, but when you start out, you think that's how long a project's going to take. There's your program. Virtually every project's taken longer
Because they virtually rebuilt the building, haven't they? And of course, there's asbestos as well. So
yeah, it's a big undertaking.
yeah, okay, thanks.
Can I just so Councillor Peter Black doesn't give the wrong impression, it isn't asbestos in the way that you would have determined things like Oceana previously. There is some asbestos in the building that has been removed. The delay on this one was more around how the building had to be reconfigured to make sure it could accommodate things like the archives appropriately. That has meant some rework with the contractor, but the building is still on track to be opened in the middle of next year.
And are we content that we're going to get the accreditation in relation to the archive storage?
Yes.
Are we on track?
We wouldn't have gone ahead unless we.
Well,
we knew that.
you have gone ahead anyway, but because it's work in progress, isn't it?
No, Councillor Black, we would not be putting the archives in there. It has been designed in order for it to be delivered and built.
I know. As a member of the archives committee, I know this has been work in progress.
Then maybe you should declare an interest.
Working towards accreditation.
Maybe you should declare an interest.
Well, the archives committee is not really an interest, is it? It's a member. Yeah.
Oh, are you asking that?
Okay, can we bring this back a bit?
My point is that moving towards accreditation has been a work in progress, which I'm confident you're going to reach. All I'm asking is, have we got to that stage now where the various professional bodies are saying that yes, we're okay and it's going to be accredited?
That is my understanding. I will ask one of the officers to confirm that for you, but you may know more than us as you're a member of the archives committee.
Well, well, we don't always get that report, to be honest.
Okay, well,
because we manage the archives, not the building.
Okay. And again, you know, as with all of these things, we are trying to move as efficiently as possible to deliver a facility. You'll know as a member of the Archives Committee, Councillor Black, that the current facilities that the archives are in are not appropriate.
I'm not opposed to that.
And again, we're trying to get them into a state-of-the-art facility that will protect the archives for future generations.
Yeah, I absolutely, totally support that. I'm just trying to ensure that what we get is properly accredited, that's all.
And with all these schemes, is to make a better Swansea. Yeah, a Swansea that has much better footfall, more people living in the city, working in the city. Bring that footfall and people living there will make a far more viable opportunity for shops. Swansea is not on its own. The entire country has been suffering from the city centre's demise, and therefore it is important, and probably we are leading the way in actually bringing forward projects that will make Swansea far more viable. So I hope the message from this will go out rather than sort of negative, is that this is very positive. People will be able to get service questions at the desk there.
Can I just say, I'm not being negative here. I'm asking questions, which is what the Scrutiny Committee is all about. We understand your rationale behind it, but I'm asking questions. I'm entitled to ask questions, and that's what Scrutiny is all about.
I didn't interrupt you, Councillor Black.
Yes, you did, actually. You went on a complete tangent without answering my question.
Okay.
And so anyway, if I can carry on, and And I was talking to the committee per se, and not to you, Councillor Black. And what we are doing here is to be sure we have a state of the art archives, to having had lots of consultation with our archives department, with Welsh Government, to ensure that we deliver a state of the art archives, a library in the city centre which bring extra footfall, and working with lots of other partners to bring those people into this building. And I think all these projects built up together will make Swansea a far more thriving city in the future.
Okay, can we?
So just to answer the question from an officer perspective on the archive accreditation, just to mention really that I know the project team has been engaged with a specialist consultant who will be involved with the accreditation sign off at the end of the project. So this scheme has very much been designed with the accreditation, the standards in mind, linking in with the archive service as well. But I believe it's to the tail end of the programme that accreditor then would sign off categorically that it has been built out following his advice. But he has been on board throughout the design and delivery of the scheme. Just
Thank you. That was my understanding as well. I just wanted to be sure that's where we were going at, because there has been some concern in the Archives Committee about that, and that we're going to achieve that, and I'm glad that we are going to achieve it. Thank you very much.
Can I go to Councillor Chris Evans?
Yeah, it was just to say with the design for the children's library being progressed, just to confirm that design includes the weight of the shelves and the weight of any books going onto the shelves, because sometimes in library design that can be missed.
I'm assuming it is, but we will ask Leader.
Yeah. Chair, on the children's library, for those that know the site, it's going into the old Miss Selfridge part of the store,
Right.
which is at ground level. So yes, it has been designed in that way, and it's in an appropriate part of the building.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all of the regeneration projects. Obviously, some of these regeneration projects are going to be at different stages. And was it? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wendy Fitzgerald. Wendy, you're on mute. You're still on mute, Wendy.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. It wasn't switching off. I'm not quite sure if this is relevant to what we've been talking about, but it's just a general query, and I may have missed something at some point. We used to have under strategic sites Velindre, because that was regarded as a fairly significant site. Is there a reason now why it doesn't come up? As I say, I may have missed it somewhere along the line, but if at some point that could be clarified, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. That's a question that was going to come up later on, but carry on. Phil?
Yeah, we can add that to this summary update for the next one. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly important that we update on Velindre, seeing as that was originally one of the prime sites in Wales and has never been exploited to that extent. Okay, generally, thank you very much for coming along, all of you, and answering the questions. We are now going to go into, we're going to do the work plan first, and then we're going to go into private session. The panel is requested to exclude the public from the meeting during the consideration of the report on project summaries. The report does a grounds that involves the likely disclosure of exempt information set out in 12A of the Local Government Act. I ask you formally to move exclusion
Chair,
of the public.
Just before you do, Chair, can I just check, because obviously we fetched the officers here today on the basis of the open report. I'm not aware of a request for the officers to bring information that may be pertinent to the private session. And again, I wouldn't want you to go into private session on the basis that we then unprepared to answer your questions.
I think the questions are general and not about specifics, to be honest.
I'm just checking the mechanism for doing this, because usually we have a published public interest test for going into private session. That doesn't exist in the agenda as far as I'm aware.
No, it
So
wasn't.
it's being introduced on the day, and I'm just checking the appropriateness of that because I do want to protect officers from being placed in a position where they're being asked questions that they're unable to ask at this point in time. And as I think we'd agreed previously, where the committee, which quite rightly would want to delve into detail, that should be planned into the work so that the appropriate officers can be here with the appropriate reports.
I accept what you're saying, Leader, but you know, this isn't. We're not going to hold anybody to responsible. It won't be no recording. It is generally just an overview of it. We're not going to go into specifics. So that I can assure you, and we certainly want to hold officers into a position that we would compromise them.
All I would say then, Chair, if you're not going into specifics, I'm not sure it'll pass the public interest test.
I think it would, in as much as the length of contracts and the type of contracts, because those are the types of things that I know that one or two members want to ask. Okay.
Okay, well, I welcome legal officers' advice on that then.
Well, we can postpone it if you like, and I will get the legal officers to check up on it. But you know, I do feel that you know the exemption would have been qualified in as much as the length of times that some of these contracts are going to be run up is not a financial issue. So that being the case, we will cancel the private section. Councillor Linda James.
Hi, Chris. It's my understanding as a public meeting that you can't amend the agenda. You can perhaps cancel an item off it, but you can't add to an agenda.
Yeah,
so an additional meeting.
There are times you can do it. Believe you me, there are times it's been done. But that being the case, and taking the leader's issues about fact, then we will not go into private session, and we will target another meeting where all these items will be discussed. Okay.
Yeah. Chair, can I just say, look, I welcome that, and look, just a commitment from myself, the cabinet member, I'm sure all the officers, is that if we get full notice of that, I'm sure we'll all welcome coming with the appropriate information to be able to answer any questions members have.
We certainly will program it for the next meeting, because I know there are issues around here, and taking up Councillor Francis Davis's point about all the projects are to enhance the city. That is exactly what we are here to do, is to be a critical friend. But at the same time, we need to understand, and the public need to understand, number one, what would be the benefits of all these projects? Are they going to increase jobs? The footfall is an issue which obviously will be addressed with some of the consultants' reports, and the fact that you know, we put in things into the city centre that people will want to see. But I do believe, and I think you understand, that as a scrutiny board, we need to understand the financial consequences of doing all this, and if there's what the benefits would likely be. So we will have a session where we will go into private, into camera, and hopefully at some stage these issues can be discussed in the public domain as well. But thank you.
Absolutely welcome that, Chair, and as you know, myself and all of Cabinet will turn up to support those sessions. We welcome the critical friend function of scrutiny. Would not want to fetter that in any way. But again, it's just that I think it's important, especially from an officer perspective, that they're able to prepare for the private session so that they know the sorts of questions that members will want to get into. As you've acknowledged yourself, it's a very, very broad capital programme. And I think we've had discussions previously about trying to structure the questions and sessions in such a way that we can make sure that we have the relevant officers in the room with us so that members can do a deep dive into each one of those projects at the will of the committee. But it's just making sure we're prepared for that. So, Chair, as you know, I'm very, very keen to support the work of the committee, and perhaps you and I can take a conversation offline about how we best achieve that.
Okay, thank you. And that being the case, then we'll go on to item 8, which is the work plan. In between that, can I thank you all very much, all the officers for coming, and the cabinet member and the leader for this particular meeting. As you can understand, it is a very, very vital part of the city of Swansea and what we are going. The one thing I would ask, and what Councillor Wensley Fitzgerald said about the adding Velindre into it, because of the importance of that site and the fact, let's be blunt about it, it's after, you know, tens of millions of pounds spent on it. We only have one tenant, and I think the time has come that we really think about how that is going to be, what is going to be done with it in the future. Thank you. Right, item 8, the work plan. Have any members got any issues that they want to bring up? Just to let you know, we are having a pre-decision scrutiny on the budget, and at the moment we're looking at the 18th of February, and it'll be in the afternoon prior to the scrutiny program committee. Okay, and that's prior notice. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning. I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.